Most climbers assume the fastest way down is the safest. They are wrong. The fastest descents from the death zone are not just records. They are desperate races against the clock, where one mistake means you never come down at all. The statistics are unforgiving. 80% of all mountaineering accidents happen on the descent. The body has burned its energy reserves, fighting gravity on the way up. The oxygen tanks are depleting. The adrenaline that masks the pain of the ascent begins to fade. At this altitude, the human body is actively dying. Every minute spent above 8,000 meters destroys muscle tissue and brain cells. The hypoxic environment creates a biological countdown that cannot be paused. To survive the death zone, the traditional strategy was to move carefully and conserve energy. But a new philosophy emerged that flipped this logic on its head. Instead of moving slowly to be safe, some climbers decided to outrun the physiological clock entirely. They realized that the only way to cheat the brutal arithmetic of high altitude was to get down before the mountain had time to kill them. Subscribe to our channel for more forensic analysis of the risks climbers take at the edge of human endurance. In July of 2018, a Polish ski mountaineer named Andrzej Bargiel stood on the summit of K2. He did not intend to walk down. He clicked into his bindings and prepared to do what was considered impossible. He was going to ski the second highest mountain on Earth. This was not a stunt. It was a study in kinetic control under the most extreme conditions imaginable. The descent from K2 is not a simple matter of gravity. It is a navigational nightmare through zones that usually require ropes, ice axes, and hours of slow rappelling. The most critical section of his line was the bottleneck. This narrow couloir sits directly beneath a massive serac. This hanging cliff of ice sheds tons of debris without warning. For a climber on foot, the bottleneck is a game of Russian roulette. You move as fast as your hypoxic lungs allow, hoping the ice holds. For Bargiel, the skis change the variable of time. He could move through the danger zone faster than anyone on foot, but the physical cost was astronomical. Skiing at 8,000 meters imposes a unique physiological tax. Unlike climbing, skiing relies on eccentric muscle contractions to absorb terrain shock. This requires massive amounts of oxygen in air that contains only 1/3 of sea level values. Every turn burned through Bargiel's limited reserves instantly. He stopped frequently, not to rest his legs, but to allow his heart to pump enough oxygenated blood to his brain to prevent a blackout. The technical reality of the terrain left no margin for error. The face of K2 is not soft snow. It is often bulletproof ice angled at 60 degrees. If a ski edge slipped, friction would not stop the fall. Bargiel would slide thousands of meters to the Godwin-Austen Glacier below. To solve the navigational puzzle, Bargiel relied on a drone. While most expeditions use drones for cinema, Bargiel used his for forensics. His brother flew the device to scout snow bridges and crevasses in real time, allowing Bargiel to assess the stability of the snowpack before committing his weight to it. He linked the Abruzzi Ridge to the Cézanne route over a descent that covered more than 3,000 vertical meters. He did not just survive the mountain, he solved it. By converting potential energy into kinetic speed, he reduced his exposure to the death zone from days to hours. But the skis gave Bargiel a mechanical shortcut. The next climber we'll examine had no equipment advantage, just a body that seemed to defy the laws of physiology. But what if you could climb Everest without ropes, without camps, without oxygen? What if your body alone was enough? One climber decided to find out, and the results would redefine what the human body could endure. For decades, climbing Everest meant siege tactics, with large teams, fixed ropes, and stockpiled oxygen. The speed revolution, known as fast and light, stripped away these safety nets. The logic was simple. If you are fast enough, you do not need a tent or bottled oxygen, because you will not be in the death zone long enough to die. Kilian Jornet became the face of this philosophy. In 2017, the Catalan athlete summited Everest twice in a single week, without fixed ropes or supplemental oxygen. His approach treated the highest mountain on Earth like a trail run. This was a physiological gamble of the highest order, Moving this fast reduces the window of exposure to objective hazards like avalanches and icefall. You spend less time under the Sirax, you spend less time freezing, but you also eliminate all safety margins. If a speed climber breaks a leg or succumbs to altitude sickness, there is no team to help them. There is no camp to retreat to. The gear they carry is often measured in grams. They trade survival equipment for speed, creating a binary outcome. You either succeed or you die. This capability is not just about training, it is often about genetics. The Sherpa people have lived at high altitude for generations. Their physiology has adapted to the low-pressure environment. Studies show their mitochondria are more efficient at using oxygen. Climbers like Pemba Dorje have used this genetic advantage to sprint up Everest in just over 8 hours. For a sea-level native like Jornet, replicating this performance requires a physiological override, but ascending too rapidly carries a specific medical risk. High-altitude cerebral edema, HACE, is a condition where the brain swells due to the lack of pressure. It usually strikes climbers who ascend too fast without acclimatizing. The symptoms are subtle at first: a loss of balance, a sense of confusion. In the context of a speed record, these symptoms can be mistaken for simple fatigue. If a speed climber pushes through the early warning signs of HACE, the brain swelling can lead to coma and death within hours. Jornet faced this reality during his second summit. He hallucinated. He lost track of time. His body was shutting down, but his speed allowed him to descend to thicker air before the condition became fatal. The line between pushing through fatigue and pushing into a coma is invisible. One more hour at that altitude, and Jornet would not have made it down. But he did not know how close he was. The speed revolution proved that the human body could perform at the limit without life support systems. But running down a mountain still takes hours. There is another method that reduces the descent to mere minutes, but it requires a terrifying leap of faith. But what if you did not descend at all? What if you could leave the mountain in minutes instead of days? In 1988, a French alpinist attempted something that seemed to violate the laws of mountaineering itself. While runners like Jornet relied on lung capacity, others looked to aerodynamics to solve the descent problem. In September 1988, French alpinist Jean-Marc Boivin stood on the summit of Everest with a 60-pound pack. He had already exhausted himself climbing the southeast ridge, but inside his pack was not extra oxygen or survival gear. It was a paraglider. His plan was to bypass the treacherous descent entirely. He intended to fly from the roof of the world to base camp. The physics of flight at 8,000 meters are terrifying. Lift relies on air density, which sits at roughly 1/3 of sea level values at the summit. To generate enough lift, a pilot must achieve a takeoff speed significantly higher than normal. Boivin had to sprint down the summit slope over loose snow and ice with hypoxic legs. A stumble during this takeoff run would send him cartwheeling down the Kangshung face. But the run was only the second problem. The first was the weight. To launch a paraglider, you need wind coming up the face to inflate the wing. Boivin stood on the summit for hours, watching his oxygen supply dwindle, waiting for the specific wind vector that would allow him to leave. This is the gamble of the aerial descent. You are trading the physical exertion of down climbing for the absolute uncertainty of atmospheric conditions. If the wind did not shift, Boivin would have been forced to walk down in the dark, exhausted, likely to his death. Finally, the wind turned. Boivin inflated his canopy and ran. He cleared the rock band and was instantly suspended over 3,000 meters of void. The descent that followed defies the standard logic of mountaineering. A climber usually takes 2 days to descend from the summit to base camp, stopping at Camp 4 and Camp 2. Boivin covered that vertical distance in 11 minutes. He arrived at Camp 2 before his support team on the summit had even finished packing their gear. However, this method introduces a hazard that no ice axe can mitigate. The jet stream often rakes the summit of Everest with winds exceeding 100 miles per hour. A paraglider is a soft wing structure. If Boivin had encountered a pocket of wind shear or severe turbulence caused by the mountain's topography, the wing would have collapsed. At that altitude, In that thin air, recovery is mathematically impossible. The wing would not reinflate before impact. Boivin survived his gamble, proving that the fastest way down is to leave the mountain entirely. But the purest speed climbers did not use gliders or skis. They used only their bodies and their belief that speed itself was a form of safety. One Swiss climber took this philosophy further than anyone and paid the ultimate price. Uli Steck did not view speed as a stunt. He viewed it as a safety protocol. His philosophy was grounded in a cold, logical assessment of objective hazards. On a high alpine face, the mountain is constantly trying to kill you. Seracs collapse. Rocks fall as the sun melts the ice holding them in place. Avalanches sweep the couloirs. Steck argued that these events are functions of time. If a serac falls once every 12 hours, and you spend 12 hours on the face, your exposure to risk is high. If you climb the face in 2 hours, you have statistically reduced your chance of dying by a factor of 6. This logic drove him to the south face of Annapurna in 2013. This wall is considered one of the deadliest climbs in the world. It is a complex matrix of rock and ice that had repelled massive siege-style expeditions. Steck climbed it alone. He climbed it at night to minimize rockfall, and he climbed it with a speed that seemed to violate physiological laws. He completed the round trip in 28 hours. To achieve this, Steck entered a state of flow where fear is suppressed by absolute focus. But this state carries a hidden danger. It erodes natural caution. When you survive the impossible once, you begin to believe the impossible is normal. The brutal arithmetic of the mountains fades, replaced by a false sense of immunity. Steck began to treat 8,000-meter peaks like training grounds. He moved with the confidence of someone who had solved the equation of risk. But the equation is dynamic. The variables change every day. In April 2017, Steck was on Nuptse, a peak adjacent to Everest, acclimatizing for a traverse. He was moving solo, as always. He was moving fast. We will never know exactly what happened in those final seconds. There were no cameras or witnesses. Perhaps a boot slipped on blue ice, or a rock dislodged from above. What we know is that the slope's friction was insufficient to arrest a fall. Steck fell 1,000 meters to the western Coombe. The speed that had been his armor for decades could not protect him from gravity. The Swiss machine was biological, subject to the same unforgiving physical limits as everyone else. His death forced the climbing world to reckon with the cost of the stopwatch. Speed on the world's highest peaks is not a conquest of the mountain. It is a temporary negotiation with gravity. The climbers who race down from the death zone are not overpowering the environment, they are fleeing it. André Barguil, Jean-Marc Boivin, and Uli Steck prove that reducing exposure time is the most effective way to cheat the physiological clock. But the mountain does not care about records. It does not care about technique. It only cares about the laws of physics. If you push the velocity too high, eventually you will crash. The fastest descents in history show us the incredible capacity of the human body, but they also highlight the razor-thin margin between glory and the grave. If this analysis of high-altitude risk opened your eyes to the real dangers of the death zone, hit that like button. Subscribe and ring the bell to join us for more forensic breakdowns of the risks human bodies take at the limits of endurance.